So it's been about a year since Nintendo launched their Nintendo 64 system as part of the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. And I gotta say, overall, I'm pretty happy with where things have progressed. If you recall, when the system first released last year, it was riddled with emulation issues. There were issues pertaining to fog rendering, but there was also more egregious bugs where potentially save files could be corrupted on Paper Mario, and there was just basically a laundry list of emulation related problems that we weren't really sure if they were ever going to be acknowledged and addressed. But the good news is, and credit where credit is due, Nintendo has certainly listened to the feedback of customers and addressed many, not all of these issues, but they have addressed many of these issues. And in today's episode, we're going to take a look at the latest 2.7.0 release that just released with the launch of Pilotwings 64. Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. With internet privacy being such a huge deal these days, it's more important now than ever to protect yourself. With Surfshark VPN, you can easily hide your IP address and encrypt all data that you send and receive. You can easily switch regions to other countries in the world. This means not only your true IP address and identity is masked, it also means you can get around any annoying geolocation locked video content. You know, the ones that say, this video isn't supported in your country? This can get annoying for me when I want to watch local Aussie news. With Surfshark VPN, I can switch my country to Australia and this problem simply goes away. When I'm researching my videos, because of the nature of my channel, sometimes I need to access older unsecured websites of modding and the underground, and I feel safer knowing that my true IP address is not exposed to these sites. Surfshark VPN also allows you to connect to unlimited devices simultaneously on a single account, and this includes Windows devices, Linux, Android, iOS, Amazon Fire TV, and much more. Surfshark VPN has an awesome offer on right now. If you sign up at surfshark.deal/MVG, you will save 83% off and receive 3 extra months for free. And if you think it sucks, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, which will give you plenty of time to try out Surfshark VPN risk-free. So Nintendo just launched their new update 2.7.0 for the N64 expansion pack, and this includes the release of Pilotwings 64. This is a worthy sequel to the original Pilotwings that came out on the Super NES, which was a Mode 7 style game. Pilotwings 64 is a fully 3D game that takes advantage of the Nintendo 64's system. Now, I'm a big fan of Pilotwings. It was one of the launch games that I picked up when I got my N64 back in the day, and I gotta say, this version that runs on the Nintendo Switch Online service, the first thing that I noticed, and a lot of people have noticed as well, in fact, this has already been talked about in some news outlets, that the game appears to be running at 60 frames per second. Now, if we compare that to the original game that came out in 1996 as a launch game, you'll notice that the frame rate is all over the place. The reality of Pilotwings 64 is that the game came featured with an uncapped frame rate. If you play the game on your N64, you'll see it probably running between 15 to 25 frames per second. But depending on where you are on the map, you can actually hit 60 in some parts. Now, when Pilotwings 64 first released, the frame rate didn't really bother me too much because I felt like the game was fantastic. But I always wondered what the game would be like if it ran at a silky smooth 60 FPS. Well, the good news is the Nintendo Switch Online version of Pilotwings 64 features I don't want to say it's locked at 60 because I still see moments where the game is dropping its frame rates, but it runs at a pretty solid frame rate, probably anywhere between 45 to 60 FPS depending on where you are on the map. Now, what does this mean for the Nintendo Switch Online? Does this mean that Nintendo have been improving and in some instances figuring out how to uncap frame rates and basically overclock the N64 or add more power to get a 60 FPS experience? Well, yes and no. And for this, I'm going to quote Luigi Blood on Twitter, who made a very good tweet about this, and it's something that I absolutely agree with. He goes on to say that Pilotwings 64 runs at 60 FPS because the game was programmed to run at 60 while taking into account lower frame rates. In fact, on real hardware, if you fly towards Ocean Horizon and just that, the game can run at 60 because there's basically nothing to render on screen. He also goes on to say that the N64 emulator is so inaccurate and disregards pretty much all technical timings that the games just run at their max engine cap frame rate. So this is really a byproduct of the emulation engine that may not be accurate as far as timings. There's probably way more accurate emulators out there that emulate the N64, but the kind of byproduct or the side effect of all that is that these games start to run at a better frame rate. Now, just to back up what Luigi Blood is saying, if we take a look at a comparison of Pilot Wings on the original N64 on the right-hand side and the Switch version on the left-hand side, you can see very quickly how the Switch version goes out of sync with the original game, and this points to evidence that the timings of the emulation is inaccurate. But a side effect of this, of course, is that the game will run closer to 60 FPS. Now, a lot of people are starting to think about GoldenEye 007 on the Nintendo 64 via the NSO, and again, GoldenEye on the original N64 runs at about 15 frames per second. It's quite slow and quite choppy, especially when we consider today's market, when we expect 60 frames per second experiences in pretty much everything. Well, GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64 Switch Online service will probably run at a much better frame rate than the original game. Will it hit 60 FPS locked? I don't know. It's hard to say. We'll have to wait and see what that looks like. But the good news is what we're seeing with Pilot Wings 64 running at a good frame rate should transfer over to GoldenEye 007 as well. Now, one thing I have noticed about Pilot Wings on the NSO is that the frame rate, even though it is much improved, it's night and day better than the original game, it's still not perfect. And I think really at the end of the day, Luigi Blood is absolutely on the money when it comes to his thoughts on this. Now, another thing about the latest 2.7.0 system update for N64 on the Switch, there's been some additional enhancements or improvements made. And the most interesting one is something that was announced by Oatmeal Dome. And he said a limiter for the number of RSP, which is a part of the N64 GPU's task per frame, was removed on F-Zero X. Wonder if performance is improved. Now, for those people that are familiar with F-Zero X, there is a long-standing issue with that game on the Nintendo Switch, and that is the frame rate can get very choppy at times. On the N64, it actually runs at a locked 60 FPS, or at least it appears to, based on my real-world test. Someone may tell me if that's not true, but it does run very, very well on the Nintendo 64. And one thing that I quickly noticed when I launched F-Zero when it first came out for the service was it was significantly dropping its frame rates, especially when there were a lot of other races on track. And in some instances, it would just dip its frame rates for no real apparent reason. This is something that's instantly noticeable, and it really does detract from the overall experience. F-Zero X on the N64 service for the Switch is pretty good, but it's not the best way to play the game, hands down. I would recommend just going back to original hardware or just use an emulator. Now, this particular line item is said to address the frame rate issues on F-Zero X, but unfortunately, in my real-world tests, although things seem to be better, I'm still seeing a lot of frame rate drops in particular races. And overall, again, as mentioned, Nintendo has come a long way since the original release of the N64 system for the Switch, version 1.00, all the way back 1 year ago. Things are definitely getting a lot better, but there is still more work to be done to get a more accurate representation of something like F-Zero X, which I think really needs to be fixed to just get that frame rate nice and smooth, just the way that we expect it to. But overall, I'm quite pleased with the way things have progressed on the N64 service for the Nintendo Switch. The first year has been a little shaky, but Nintendo, since around February or March, has really brought some good improvements to the table. Of course, it's not perfect, it's emulation, and we're going to continue to see these issues start to crop up when new games get added. But in general, having a version of Pilot Wings that runs way better than the original, and it looks better than the original as well, I might add, is a good thing. Even though it may be a byproduct of the N64 emulator itself, at the end of the day, the customers are getting a good representation of that game. Probably something that Nintendo and Paradigm and Nintendo EAD, when they were developing the game, really wanted back in the day, but there was just no way they were going to hit 60 on the N64. But I'm quietly confident that the next 12 months of this service, we're going to see not only some really big games coming out. Obviously, GoldenEye is one that is slated to come out. We don't know when that's going to be. Probably, if I was to guess, sometime early next year, but really does depend on how that's being marketed and whether they are basically waiting for Microsoft to finish the Xbox version and kind of co-release it at the same time. I don't really know how that's going to play out, but there are other games that I think the service could really benefit from. 1080 Snowboarding is one that I'd really like to see. Mischief Makers is another. I mean, there's probably games that have licensing issues that I'm not really privy on. Banjo-Tooie may be another one that would be really cool to see on the service as well. So there's some classic games that I'd like to see on the N64 going into the second year of this service. But that really covers it for today. I'm very happy with how this service is progressing, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What games would you like to see on the N64 service for the Switch? You've probably got your favorites. Let me know what they are in the comments below. But for now, we are going to leave it here for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to put a like on it, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye for now.